Hello guys, good afternoon. Welcome to Litbard. So today we are going to discuss history of English literature in briefly. So let's start. History of English literature. The history of English literature starts with the Anglo-Saxon and Germanic settlers in Anglo-Saxon England in 5th century, that is 450. The oldest English literature was in Old English, which is the earliest form of English and is a set of Anglo-Frisian dialects. Beowulf is the earliest and most popular work in Old English literature. As the Normans conquested to England, Middle English replaced the Old English and was used by Geoffrey Chaucer in his famous work, The Canterbury Tales. Further, William Shakespeare came to be considered as the most iconic and greatest writer in the history of English literature, as he is revered for his legendary plays and sonnets. So here you can see the periods in English literature and their time period. Old English or Anglo-Saxon period, that is 450 to 1066. Middle English period 1066 to 15,000. Sorry, 1500. The Renaissance 1500 to 1600. The Neoclassical period 1600 to 1785. The Romantic period 1785 to 1832. The Victorian Age 1832 to 1901. The Edwardian period 1901 to 1914. The Georgian period 1910 to 1936. The modern period early 20th century and postmodern period mid 20th century. So this is the classification of English literature and their period. Here you can see the timeline of the history of English literature. Here is a detailed historical timeline of the history of English literature from its beginning, from the classical period to postmodern age. The major periods and some highlights point. The classical period 1200 BC to 455 BC. That is the highlights are the Homeric, or it is called as Homeric or heroic period, uh, classical Greek period, classical Roman period, and patristic period. The medieval period, that is 455 CE to 1485 CE. That is the Old English or Anglo-Saxon period and the Middle English period. Then Renaissance and Reformation, that is 485 to 1660 CE. That is that can be highlighted as the early Tudor period, Elizabethan period, Jacobean period, Caroline Age, Commonwealth period, Puritan, that is Puritan interregnum. Then the Enlightenment and or the Neoclassical period, that can be divided into three major periods, that are Restoration period, the Augustan Age, and the Age of Johnson. Then the Romantic period, that is Romantic poem, Gothic writings, the Victorian period, and the 19th century, that is sentimental novels, intellectual movements like aestheticism and the decadence. The modern period, modernist writer, realism, etc. The postmodern period, metafiction, multiculturalism, magic poetry, etc. The most important eight periods of English literature, that is Old English period, Middle English period, the Renaissance, the Neoclassical period, the Romantic period, the Victorian period, the Edwardian period, the Georgian period, modern period and postmodern period. Then we go to the summary and notes of history of English literature. All English literature that is 5th century to 14th century. The history of English literature starts with the Germanic tradition of Anglo-Saxon settlers, which were around 5th to 11th century AD, and the first long narrative poems in the history of English literature were Beowulf and Wood. These two were highly narrative poems of this early period of the history of English literature. Beowulf is be considered as the first English epic poem, and some of the authors' other famous work produced during the Old English literature include Genesis, Exodus, The Wanderer, Wife's Lament, Husband's Message, The Battle of Maldon, etc. Earlier, to understand the temperament of readers, writers would make us alteration rather than rhyming. Rhyming scheme. Moreover, some of the famous writers of English literature were Sign-Off and Cadmon. Then Middle English literature, that is 14th to 15th century. As referred to the later Middle English literary period, the Middle English literature comprises of a diverse range of work as the population of England during this time was literate and considerable portion was also bilingual and trilingual. Geoffrey Chaucer is amongst the highly regarded poets within the period of 1342 to 1400 and was renowned for his courtly love poetry, including the famous of Canterbury Tales, though it was left incomplete. The House of Fame and the Book of Duchess. He became one of the core political servants in Britain's court. William Langland's famous religious work, including Piers Plowman, also deserves a crucial mention as it represents another popular genre of English literature, which was secular and religious prose. During the era of medieval English literature, the most esteemed work also include morality plays, miracle plays, and interludes. Everyman was a noted morality play of the time, and miracle play were taken from the Bible and were frequently performed in churches. Then the Elizabethan age, that is known as the golden age of English literature, bringing a distinctive paradigm shift in the history of English literature. The Elizabethan age represents the brilliant century of all the periods and is also known as the Golden Age. Sir Thomas Watt and Henry Howard has a massive contribution to this age. Thomas introduced sonnet to Great Britain, and the Earl of Surrey brought the use of blank verse, which was later utilized by celebrated Elizabethan writers like Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, John Milton, to name a few. Tuttle's Miscellany is considered as the first printed book amongst the different poetry work of this period. The Golden Age in the history of English literature brought a gallery of authors of genius and literary masterpieces. It was a dynamic age filled with intellectual and religious revolution and upheavals. As the new humanism surged, there were many significant works like Sir Thomas Hobbes, Castiglione, and Sir Thomas North Plutarch. Edmund Spenser is another prolific name in Golden Age who is also known as the poet's poet. His famous poem in 1579, the Shepherd's Calendar, under 89 sonnets, got highly popular. Sir Philip Sidney, Arcadia, Michael Drayton, Sir Walter Raleigh, Ben Jonson are some of the important names in the medieval English literature. There was a famous group in the Golden Age which was known as the University wits. This group would include noted alumni writers from the University of Cambridge and the University of Oxford. John Lilly, Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Nash, George Bille are some of the celebrated names under this group. John Donne also play a great role in the metaphysical poetry and beautiful sonnets of the Elizabethan age. Sir Francis Bacon popularized the scientific methods of analysis and wrote many intellectual and analytical essays in this period. Moreover, literary dramas have a crucial role to play in making this age golden. The first comedy play under this age was Ralph Roster Roster by Nicholas Udall. From Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, Julius Caesar to A Midsummer Night's Dream, As You Like It, and Romeo and Juliet, William Shakespeare contributed many historical dramas and tragedies, as well as romantic plays and comedies to the Golden Age. Notable writers of the Elizabethan era also include John Milton, John Webster, Thomas Kidd, George Pille, Ben Jonson, and many others. Then the Restoration Age, 17th to 18th century. Another revolutionary change in the history of English literature was brought forward by the Restoration Age, which immensely reflected the political conflict of the late 17th century. John Dryden emerged as one of the prominent literary figures of this age. He wrote a famous heroic poem, Astraradix, and was also known for Mac Flecknoe. To attack his contemporaries, he wrote mock poems and wrote essay on criticism. Oliver Goldsmith, The Traveller and The Deserted Village, was highly popular in this era. Another prominent writer of this Restoration literature was John Milton, a well-known controversialist who wrote the famous Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and Samson Agonist. Thomas Gray, William Blake, Robert Burns are unavoidable names whose literary work has been highly acclaimed. The eminent philosopher of this era was John Locke, who wrote many essays like the Essay Concerning Human Understanding, and most of his works delved deeper into the unraveling the works of the civil society as well as debate and exploration on human intelligence. Concluding the Restoration period of the history of English literature, the 18th century witnessed the publication of political literature as well as the advent of novels. Robert Harley, Daniel Defoe, and Jonathan Swift were amongst the major political writers of this era. During the mid 18th and late 18th century, novels were introduced in the world. Daniel Defoe experimented with the prose narrative and wrote a novel called Robinson Crusoe. He was one of the esteemed and prominent writers to introduce novel writing to the literary world. In prose writing, Richard Steele, Jonathan Swift are also some of the popular names in prose writing, as they were renowned for their satirical style of writing. The Romantic period from 19th century. The Romantic age of this history of English literature experimented with the earliest form of poetry and brought many interesting genres of prose fiction. The key figure of the poetry of this period was the emphasis laid on individual thought and personal feeling. William Blake, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge were the brilliant poetry genius of this era as they cutted glorious work rooted in the nature, love, romance as well as contemporary thought. The later romantics were Shelley, Keats and Byron who carried on the legacy in 20th century. The novels of this era were written as a form of entertainment to the now literate public and were a stern commentary on many prominent events such as French Revolution. The Gothic novel is an important invention in prose fiction, and some of its prominent writers were Horace Walpole, Matthew Lewis, Anne Radcliffe, and Mary Shelley. On the other hand, Jane Austen stood by the conservation form of prose fiction through popular romantic novels like Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Persuasion, Northanger Abbey, to name a few. Then 20th century. After the end of the Victorian age, the modern history of English literature began with the beginning of 20th century. Rudyard Kipling is considered as one of the greatest writers in this century. He was born in India and then moved to Lahore and was a supporter of colonization. His main works include Kim, Life's Handicap, apart from his significant book, The Jungle Book. Some prominent contributions to the 20th century were E.M. Foster's A Passage to India, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, First Man on the Moon, etc. D.H. Lawrence has the greatest contribution to this century. James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, George Orwell, William Golding, John Galsworthy, George Bernard Shaw, Harold Pinter, T.S. Eliot are some of the prolific names which were popular for their 20th century drama. In poetry literature of the 20th century, William Butler Yeats, T.S. Eliot, W. H. Auden, Thomas Hardy, G.M. Hopkins, Dylan Thomas are some of the renowned names of poetry landscape in the era of the history of English literature. Some of the prolific war poets include Robert Brooke, Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen. So hey guys, thank you for watching this video. And if this video is considered as uh, if this video seems to be informative, uh, do subscribe and do share with your friends. Thank you for watching this video.